Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 31 of College Football Throwdown. I am your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Good evening, college football fans.
All right, good evening to you all. We are coming here to talk about the games of Week 13 of college football and the new playoff rankings, as well as the upcoming conference championship games and the end of the season. We're getting to that point. It seems like only yesterday that we did our coverage of the first week, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Don't remind me. It's sickening that I can think that I'm going to need to wait a whole nother 9 months before I can get this horrible taste out of my mouth.
It's true. Well, I tried to make the most of it with the extended weekend. I had some days off of work, so I watched the games on Friday. Obviously, the Nebraska-Iowa game. We were both paying close attention to that one. And that was the night of the TCU game as well.
Correct.
TCU and Baylor, which surprised me. I did not think Baylor was going to lose to them.
Neither did I.
Yep. And then on Saturday, I found a Michigan sports bar with Michigan fans to watch the Ohio State game, because that's obviously one that growing up I was was attached to, even though I wasn't a Michigan fan, because just everybody in the state kind of watches that game. And it was a lot of fun to see with some Michigan fans. I met some cool people there, but it did get to be a little depressing in the second half because everyone's spirits kind of fell, and it kind of got into what we've talked about in the past, how with certain rivalries they're so bitter that it's almost like that game matters more than anything else. Like I brought up to one of them what I've said in the past about Lloyd Carr. He was a coach under Michigan who was winning them like 9-8 win kind of seasons, and then the people who they had to replace him did worse in terms of record, but fans just got frustrated with him because he had a bad losing streak against Ohio State, and they couldn't stand that anymore.
Right, that's right. So yeah, like you say, certain games are must wins if you're going to be a coach. Yeah. It used to be that way with Oklahoma and Nebraska. That was the thing with the pressure on Osborne was almost directly related to whether or not he beat Oklahoma the previous year or not.
Right. Yeah, I'm always a little sad that I missed out on that era of Nebraska football, because to me, Oklahoma was consistently one of the best teams in the Big 12 while we were still in the Big 12, but there wasn't that same
right
feeling.
No, that's true.
Yeah. And then I saw that game. I was watching, the Clemson game was on at that time too. And then I came back and watched the end of the Alabama-Auburn game a little bit, and then watched through the entirety of the Stanford-Notre Dame game, which turned out to be a good decision because that was a great game.
It was a great game.
Mm-hmm. All right, so getting into the first topic of discussion, we have our ranking, not our rankings, but our score predictions from last week.
I've got to go ahead before we go any further and open my beverage here, buddy, because I've been waiting to do this for a while here, so I'm ready. Okay. Ready?
Yeah. There we go. You can drown your sorrows that the season is ending with that.
Exactly. Okay, talk to us, man.
All right, so we already talked about this on our specifically Nebraska-Iowa podcast, but we had two differing scores. I said we were both thinking positively, thinking Nebraska could pull off the upset. I said 35-30, you said 42-28, and we both turned out to be wrong, unfortunately, in that case.
That's true.
Yep.
Sorry, you caught me when I was drinking.
Okay. And then this was an interesting one, Navy and Houston.
Yes.
Because we were both talking about how that was kind of like a game that didn't pop off the screen as being a great game, but was one we thought was going to be. You predicted a 32-28 victory for Navy. I predicted 38-21. But then Houston ended up upsetting them 52-31 and kind of
right. It wasn't even close. They just. I was very disappointed because I had seen Navy play a few times this year, and I really felt pretty good about their talent. And after Houston had lost the previous week to UConn, I thought, well, that's a strong indication that Houston was maybe not as good as I thought. But then Houston pretty much dominated Navy. So there you go. That's why you don't understand this game of football.
That's true. I did just see something pop up on my Facebook the other day. Navy has these specific helmets they've made for the Navy Army game. I don't know if you saw those.
No, what's
Uh,
up with those?
they're like this deep blue color, and they have like a wooden ship like painted on them.
Ooh.
They look cool.
Hmm. Yeah, I'll have to look. I'll search the internet for that, the interwebs.
Oh, using Google. What a search.
Yes.
What a shock.
Yes.
All right. And then obviously the game, as we were talking about, Ohio State, Michigan. You predicted a 28-24 victory for Ohio State. I predicted 24-28. We were kind of speculating last week about whether Ohio State was going to bounce back after that disappointing loss to Michigan State. If their team, the comments Ezekiel Elliott made, if that was going to rattle them a little bit, but it certainly did not.
Right. Well, that's the thing. You anticipated that there was going to be a reaction. It was going to be one of two things. Either the reaction they got, which obviously what they wanted, which was to refocus and come out fire and brimstone, which they did, or have a hangover because we had a chance to be this best of all time kind of football team and we've blown it, and kind of mail it in. Well, they definitely took the first approach and had great success.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And then there was the Oklahoma State game, big game in the Big 12 to decide Oklahoma's future. I predicted a 42-24 victory for Oklahoma over Oklahoma State. You predicted a 42-32 victory. And the final score ended up being 58-23, so we were both conservative, as it turns out. Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think I remember in that conversation, my thoughts were that it was so critical that the quarterback play
That's
for
true.
Oklahoma, and if he played, then they were going to win comfortably, and if he didn't, then I was very concerned.
Yeah.
And of course, he played, and he played very well. I'm still shocked that he was allowed to play, given some of the questions about whether or not he in fact had a concussion.
Right.
Usually that means you're going to sit out at least a game, but they didn't.
Well, I saw a news thing that said like that he passed the concussion tests,
Okay.
or something like that. And I should mention, on the previous podcast we actually gave scores for if he didn't play, and we both predicted. I believe we both predicted a loss for them in that scenario. So
Yeah.
shows how instrumental he really was to their team.
I think so.
All right. So now get on to just sort of the general talk about that week. I guess we'll start with one that I mentioned earlier, the Stanford Notre Dame game, which turned out to be a great, back and forth scoring kind of game.
Absolutely.
Each team taking the lead away from the other, ending with a field goal to win.
Yep, by Stanford. I know. Well, and I think you were the one who brought up the point in our previous discussion about, with Notre Dame. It's a perfect example of why, maybe you settle for a field goal once, but if you start going down in the field regularly and continually settling for field goals, at some point as a coaching staff, I think you have to convey the message to your team, we got to score touchdowns here and go for it, Notre Dame seemed to settle for field goals enough that, it came back to haunt them.
Yeah, well, Stanford's defense was great in the red zone, not so great on the other sides of the field. But I was predicting a Notre Dame victory, and watching that game all the way through, I can tell you that Notre Dame appeared to me to be the better team overall. They had more explosive plays. They were able to move the ball against Stanford pretty regularly on offense. But their defense gave up enough points to Stanford's strong offense, and they settled for field goals where Stanford got touchdowns when they got that far. And I knew that was going to be a key point in the game, because if there were 3 of them, I'm pretty sure. So if Notre Dame had turned even one of those into touchdowns, we'd be looking at a different game.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing, it kind of gets into your head at some point if you're Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then some other games. TCU Baylor, we already briefly mentioned, but that was a big upset on Friday to kind of set up
horrible weather.
Yeah, it was. But that set up that Oklahoma State game as basically being the title game for the Big 12.
Right, exactly.
And then There were a couple interesting ones, like games that were closer than you thought they would be. Given that it's rivalry week and all that. Oregon State ended up being a 52-42 final score. I think Oregon took the lead early, but Oregon State kind of crawled their way back.
That's correct. That's how that did play out. And you're right. That game often is closer than expected. And again, it's about the circumstances of the game. The level of intensity of the players. Even if they're the lesser team, they find a way to rise to the occasion.
Mm-hmm. And this is another, actually, an interesting little thing in the MAC that I saw play out. My alma mater, Ohio University, played against Northern Illinois and upset them.
Right.
And it looked like they weren't going to their MAC championship game. But then Western Michigan upset Toledo 35-30,
Right.
and all of a sudden they're back in it.
Right. Exactly.
So,
It's crazy.
funny how that works. I mentioned the Alabama-Auburn game earlier. I wasn't watching the game early, but I was looking at the scores, and I was amazed that it was like 6-6, and like 13-6, and it was this field goal, low-scoring game, whereas I thought Alabama had the potential to blow them out.
Right. I mean, if you just looked at records and looked at some comparative scores, you would have expected a blowout.
Yeah.
But again, the rivalry.
Yep. I kind of had a feeling last week that Auburn might have a chance, and I actually came down to that bar early to watch the end of that game because I was hoping that they could pull it out. And then Alabama scored a late touchdown that made the score look worse than it was, but it really was a close game up until like the second half of the fourth quarter.
I agree. And similarly, but in the reverse fashion was the Clemson score where who was it? Clemson was playing. Darn it,
South Carolina.
South Carolina scored late in that game to make it look closer than it would have. So in both cases, Alabama and Clemson late scores changed the perception of the final score and its appearance. But really, both of those, Clemson won that game more comfortably than it appears, and Alabama didn't win their game as comfortably as it appears.
True. Although I will. That Clemson game was going on while the OSU game was going on. I did see like Clemson got out to an early lead once again, but South Carolina came back and it was like 21-20, I think, at one point.
Right, that's true.
Something like that. And then we also had North Carolina and NC State. They ended up winning 45-34, but not a dominating victory.
Right. So it sets up, basically for the college football rankings, it sets up for what you can begin to project are going to be bowl matchups and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Are you ready to jump into that?
Well, there's just a couple ones other ones I want to mention.
Okay.
Well, I guess another one upset I missed, actually. Washington beat Washington State 45-10, and Washington State was ranked 20th, so they were actually considered to be the better team.
Wow, I'm so distant from those two. I didn't know that Washington State was ranked. Shame on me. And that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, but then there were some interesting, like, dominating victories by some of the top teams. Michigan State beat Penn State comfortably, 55-16.
Oh yeah.
So.
Yep, and Connor Cook, after not playing against Ohio State, did play in this game and looked very sharp while he was in there.
Yeah. So kind of, it's crazy to think, that that Ohio State team that looks so offensively dominant against Michigan could only score 14 points against Michigan State.
Well, yeah, there's so much that plays into those kinds of things. You know what I mean? It's just a week-to-week matchup deal. It's a level of intensity and attitude, and that's how good the coaches do.
It's true. UCLA USC, that's one that was obviously near and dear to the hearts of a lot of people where I am. And it was, once again, I think it was like 21-20 around halftime-ish. So it was kind of a good back and forth. But then USC kind of pulled away in the second half.
Right. And that's interesting because they've since named the USC interim coach, who was an assistant under Steve Sarkisian. They went ahead and made him the head coach. They went ahead and took the interim tag off, and they're going to keep him. So a little bit of a surprise, in my opinion, that they would choose to go that route, but they're going to stay with their guy internally.
Yeah, I guess it's a good transition because there was some coaching switches that happened recently that I wanted to talk about, and that was one of them. I remember hearing some discussion on the radio about like how he had like he came into there when he came in after the other guy was fired. They already had like two losses, and he took that kind of messy situation and did a pretty good job with it. You know, only losing to Oregon in that stretch.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, he's done a very good job. But I'm not questioning that. It's just, it's not typical for a mainstream, blue blood job like USC that they wouldn't have gone ahead and gone through the process of doing a national search net, and that he would have been a token kind of interview candidate and stuff, but that they would have pursued some other ones. But basically, their athletic director said they had been doing some conversations and phone calls and discussions with certain people, and they fairly quickly came to the conclusion that the guy they had was the right guy. So they
Yep.
just decided to go that route and bypass all the formal dance, if you will.
Yep. And then this was one close to Nebraskans' heart, a coach that we were almost considering for our head coaching position last year. Scott Frost, the offensive coordinator of Oregon, is now the head coach of UCF. So he's making his way as a head coach now.
Yes, that is an interesting development. I'm both excited for him because he's from right near my hometown, but I'm also I'm intrigued by his choice to take that one. I would have thought that there might be some other opportunities that would come his way.
You think as early as this year, or more of a let's stick with Oregon a little longer and then something bigger will come
Well,
around?
given all the openings, I think maybe some even this year, but quite possibly he might, even if it didn't happen, if he rolled the dice and said I'm going to wait and see if I can get a better job. I think the progression that we saw from Oregon's offense from early in the year to late in the year, where they appeared to get better, quite a bit better as the season progressed. That's the first time that Scott really was put in a position to, gosh, I don't know what to say. Where it was kind of on him to develop the quarterback, right? He inherited a great quarterback, as Heisman Trophy quarterback previously. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Yeah.
So this was his first big test, and I thought he demonstrated that he's got some chops because he was able to take a guy and kind of integrate him in. It didn't go smooth at first, but as the season progressed, it got a lot better. So he had positioned himself to get some looks. There's no question. And I just am a little surprised that he went with UCF, although it's a bit of a sleeping giant down there in terms of access to Florida talent, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep. And then the other big coaching piece of news from this weekend, obviously, was the whole Les Miles thing, which we talked about last week. And honestly, is something I'm a little bit like disgusted about, both in terms of. We talked last week how we both agreed that it was a little silly that all these LCU people were demanding it, but also the fact that ESPN was making it out to be this big deal. Like they had inside sources that said that Les Miles was going to be fired after this
Right.
game, no matter kind of what the outcome was. And then they asked the AD after the game, and he's like, Les Miles is here to stay.
Right. Well, and that's the thing is that they go on these speculative reports because one of their supposed insiders has it from a good source that this information is factual, that there is discussions, and say there was discussions. The fact is that until it becomes reality, don't report on it. If you got some inside insight, that's great. Then you make sure you're standing outside the locker room door to be the first one to take the news, okay? And to be able to jump on it because you knew to be in the right place at the right time. So you're geared and ready and prepared to cover it. By trying to get out in front of the story, then you become the story rather than the story. And that's so typical of what ESPN has evolved into as a broadcasting and sports journalism source. They are into being the ones that speculate on stuff rather than the ones who just report on what's going on. They tried to make a story where there wasn't a story, and now you've put the athletic director in a very tight spot. It goes back to even experiences we've had. Athletic directors, it is just not in their best interest to start talking about their head coach and his viability as the ongoing coach in the middle of their season. It does no good because they're not going to make that decision until the end of the year. They don't want to talk about it until then. It's just it's good business for them not to do that. And yet people just try to force them. Well, of course, they've got to say something. They've got to give them a sign of support. Well, guess what? I give them a sign of support, and then I still fire him at the end of the year because I didn't want to show my hand. I mean, it's crazy. There's lots of money at stake.
Oh, yeah. Big bucks. Also, can you just make sure that your headphone cord isn't like rubbing up against your hand or something?
Oh, because I moving? Because my hand was moving and getting scratching?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Sorry.
No problem. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the new playoff rankings. The top four remains exactly the same as it was last week, so not a whole lot to talk about there. Although I guess you could speculate that Michigan State might have jumped Iowa because they had a dominating win, whereas Iowa struggled against not so great Nebraska team.
Yeah, I overall I think this was a very conservative choice that they made. I regretfully was unable to listen to the broadcast when they were demonstrated live, so I didn't know the explanation of why Oklahoma didn't move up. Because they already have this definition of being a conference champion. So even though it might have only been temporary, I thought maybe they might do that just to make a point, but they chose not to, which I'm pleased with.
Yeah, I talked about that last week too, how I didn't want them to do that. Now, probably the most interesting part about this is what we talked about before, the fact that Notre Dame lost to Stanford, but is only dropped down to 8. So Stanford's 7, Notre Dame's 8,
right.
And Ohio State, a one-loss team that is not even playing in its conference championship game, is number 6 over both of them.
Right. So you've got 3 Big Ten teams at 4, 5, and 6. So almost no matter what happens this weekend, including the North Carolina team, which is sitting there at 10, if North Carolina was to beat Clemson, boy, it'd be hard to justify moving North Carolina from 10 all the way up to 4, passing, 3 Iowa teams. You know what I mean?
Right. You mean 3 Big Ten teams.
3 Big Ten teams, excuse me. Yeah, including Iowa. And so it's like, man, it pretty much slams the door on that.
Right.
So, short of and what do you do if Florida were to beat Alabama?
Right.
I mean, Florida's sitting there at 18. I mean, that would just mean that you'd almost have to have 2 Big Ten teams.
Yeah. Why don't let's kind of, now that we're into this part of the topic, why don't we just kind of break down, what could conceivably happen this weekend and how that could shake up what the top 4 would be. Because at this point, Oklahoma's in. They're not playing any more games.
Correct.
They're the Big 12 champions, so they're in. And then whoever wins the Iowa-Michigan State game is in. So one of those 2 teams is in for sure as well.
Right.
So the only real areas of discussion in terms of the chaos that can ensue is the Clemson-North Carolina game and the Alabama-Florida game.
Right.
And in the case of, we didn't mention it, but Florida had honestly a very tough game against Florida State, only getting 2 points to their 27. Right. So I feel like, and they have 3 losses now, I believe. Two losses.
No, 2 losses.
2 losses. But even if they were to beat Alabama, I'm not sure, especially if Stanford were to win if Stanford wins their championship game against USC, personally, I believe they jump Ohio State in that scenario and become the next team to get in if either Alabama or Clemson were to fall.
Right. I'm in agreement with you.
Right. But if USC were to win that game, and there's no way USC is getting in since they have 4 losses, I believe.
Correct.
So USC is out. So in that scenario, then if then North Carolina, I think, does probably maybe in that scenario they do get in if they beat Clemson.
You think rather than Ohio State getting in?
Well, I mean, so this gets into a whole discussion about how much do because they talked about in the committee how it's
Yeah.
in the rules that the only way a non-conference, non like championship team or an independent team can get in is if they are unequivocally one of the top 4 teams in the country.
Right.
So, so it becomes a question of how much do they value that national or that championship game, because North Carolina hasn't played a very tough schedule. They've beaten like 2 FCS teams and lost to South Carolina in their first game of the season, but since then have gone on to beat everybody that they've played. And under this scenario, they would have upset the number 1 team in the country, which is the best win that you could possibly put onto your resume.
Right. No, and I get that. I get all that, but I struggle to understand if that's the case, and they think their body of work is deserving of that, how they can be sitting at 10, because it would seem hard for me to comprehend how they could move from 10th all the way up to 4th because they beat Clemson. That would be a massive rise, even though you beat the number 1 team in the country. That would be a massive rise, in my opinion.
Right. Well, and as I said, this is only if Stanford were to lose to USC. I think,
Sure.
I guess it's debate of, so if both Clemson and Alabama were to lose in some freaky, crazy scenario, and Stanford were to lose, so all 3 of the teams that are expected to win lose, and so then we have North Carolina, Florida, and USC as the conference champions looking to get in. I feel like under that scenario, maybe that's how Ohio State could sneak in there, and then maybe North Carolina gets in as well.
Right. Wow. Okay. I get it. It makes sense. I just think that would, the way it sets up this time, I think it would be hard to do. But I get your point about North Carolina now that you've explained it to me. I could see where the argument could be made.
Yeah, because I feel like, I mean, we already said it's USC, no way they're getting in, and Florida, even if they were to upset Alabama, which would obviously be a huge win for them, they're even farther down. They're all the way down to 18. I find it hard to believe that even a win as quality as that could jump them up that high.
No, it couldn't. It shouldn't. It shouldn't.
Right.
I would see. My argument is even North Carolina, if they feel that strongly about that team's body of work, then they should be. North Carolina should be ahead of Florida State and frankly ahead of Notre Dame at this point, who both have 2 losses, and maybe you have a 2-loss Stanford, still ahead of North Carolina,
okay.
But they should be right there.
So here's a scenario for you. Let's say Clemson and Alabama and Stanford all lose, like I said, and so Ohio State gets in there, and Michigan State beats Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. So then we're looking at Oklahoma, Michigan State, Ohio State, and then the mysterious
North Carolina
4th spot. Right. So do you think North Carolina gets in there? Do you think a 1-loss Iowa team could sneak in there, or a 2-loss Stanford or Florida State?
No, I think that in that scenario it would be North Carolina, because all, like you said, all of those other losses happen. Stanford would drop out of there, so now North Carolina is only jumping over Notre Dame and Florida State. And if North Carolina beats Clemson, Clemson has beaten Florida State, and so you could go through that logic and recognize it pretty easily. Okay. I mean, I could get that. So I think that the only way it would be is North Carolina in that crazy scenario.
Right. So I think we both agree in terms of the teams that are on the outside looking in right now. It would go a Stanford team that's a champion is at the top of the pecking order. Then it's Ohio State. Then it's a North Carolina that upsets Clemson.
Right. So now here's the deal. So the most likely scenario is the one that's presented right in front of us. That the Iowa Michigan State winner goes, and then Oklahoma, Alabama, and Clemson are the other 3. So there's your 4 in the 2 semifinal games. And but that what that would mean then, after if it's all said and done, is who makes up the rest of that top 10, top 12, whatever, that are going to fill out the rest of those New Year's Day 6 bowls, right? Because there's 12 teams that got to fill that in.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what all that other group beyond the four is all about.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting because I feel like if Iowa were to lose to Michigan State, then I think Ohio State would be ranked above them in the Big Ten, and they would go to the Rose Bowl
I,
because Iowa
I
doesn't
would
have a lot
agree.
of quality wins.
I would agree. I think that's what would happen. That Ohio State would end up going to the Rose Bowl, representing the Big Ten out there. Obviously, if Stanford wins the conference, Stanford will go to the Rose Bowl as well as the other representative. Notre Dame will end up their season's over, so they'll end up in one of those bowls. Florida State's season is over, so they'll end up in one of those. So some of these teams that are already done now, uh, North Carolina will have another loss, and they'll drop from 10th to whatever. So they maybe drop out of that group of six. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So they go from playing in the conference championship game against the number one team in the nation. They lose to the number one team, and their punishment is they drop completely out.
Yeah.
It's just the way it goes.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also kind of funny in some of the speculation and talk I've been seeing. Ohio State last year, their biggest selling point was that they played in their conference championship game. They were the conference champion, and they destroyed Wisconsin. And that was basically the reason why they jumped up to that number 4 spot. But now this year they're not in it, but they're doing the opposite. They're claiming, well, we're not playing our conference championship, but we're still one of the best teams in the
We're still
country.
deserving. Yeah. Yep.
Which going back to that kind of eye test thing, like if I'm comparing Ohio State and North Carolina just in terms of who do I think would win in a who's the better team,
Neutral site. Yeah.
I would say Ohio State in that
Oh,
scenario.
absolutely. I would agree with you 100%.
Right. So, I mean, that gets into the whole thing of like, is Ohio State better than Iowa? I would definitely say so, but Iowa's ranked 2 spots above them.
Right, because they're 12-0, and you got to respect that until somebody beats them, and they're exposed. And again, someone could look inside the numbers, for example, of even our game against Iowa this past Friday, and begin to question Iowa's what is prowess, right?
Right.
They're a team that doesn't make very many mistakes and waits for the other team to make mistakes and play into their hands. And they'll use that same strategy again this week against Michigan State. And you expect Michigan State to hold on to the ball and not throw interceptions and do the stupid things. And if they don't, then Michigan State likely wins. But if they do, Iowa's going to be right there to take advantage of it.
Well, that's a nice transition. Why don't we talk about the upcoming games of Week 14, the conference championship games, and we'll dive
Okay.
right into that Michigan State Iowa one, which I think is the most interesting matchup, given it's number 4 and number 5 playing each other. That's going to be a pretty widely watched game, I'm sure.
Oh, I agree, and it's an evening game on Saturday night, so it should be a lot of eyes on that for
Yep.
sure.
So, what's your prediction then, based on what you were just saying? What do you think the score is
Oh,
going to end up being?
well, I think in my mind, Michigan State is a pretty substantial a favorite in my mind. Most of the things that I thought I believed about Iowa going into the Nebraska matchup with Iowa, I still believe. I think they pretty much were the team I thought they were going to be. And the only sad part for me is Bad Tommy showed up and made sure that we didn't have a chance to win it. And so that's a problem for Nebraska and Nebraska supporters. But the reality is that Michigan State, in my opinion, is a dramatically superior team. Now, there's some caveats. Connor Cook, although he played great this past week against Penn State, was running around that field shaking his arm after practically every 2 or 3 plays, and so you wonder if there's going to come a point, he's going to throw one ball, and all of a sudden the strength in his arm's going to go out or something, and all of a sudden he's unavailable. And if that happens, yes, the backups played well when they played Ohio State, but you just never know in those kinds of situations. So there is that question about how healthy is Connor. But other than that, I think Michigan State is way better and will beat Iowa substantially.
So what's your score?
Wow, great question. I'm going to suggest to you that because both teams will probably play a little close to the vest early, it's gonna be close early, but that Michigan State's going to pull ahead and end up winning by 24 points. So let me see what I'd have to get to. 40. What would that be? Like 48? No, that's probably too many points scored. Um,
Yeah, this isn't a
let's
Big
go
12.
45. Yeah, let's go 45-21.
All right. I actually already wrote mine down. I'm going to say 35-21.
Okay.
I feel like you said, Connor Cook might slow them down a little bit on offense, and Iowa's defense, was like they got a good front seven. I think they showed that against us. I mean, we were able to move the ball against them. We were hurt more by our own interceptions than anything. But I do think their defense has the potential to slow them down. But I also think MSU's defense is much better and will definitely slow their offense down as well.
Right, right. And I think that over time, though, if Michigan State plays the way they have the last couple of weeks, they will wear out Iowa's defense, and eventually the chunks of yardage will begin to happen.
All right. Then let's go to USC Stanford. Having watched that Stanford Notre Dame game, I haven't followed Stanford much throughout the season, but I was definitely impressed by them there. And I was watching the USC Oregon game the previous week, and USC didn't look so good in that game. So I do believe Stanford is going to win that game. I'm going to go ahead and predict that it will be let's say 38-21 victory.
Wow, I'm in agreement with you on who wins. 38-21. I'm going to say it's a little lower scoring. I'm going to say like 31. 31-17.
All right. Very good. And then we have Florida and Alabama. Honestly, I believe of all the matchups, this one might be the most lopsided. I could be wrong, but seems like Florida, the way they were playing that Florida State game, just did not show themselves to be a top tier, kind of football team. So I'm personally going to predict that Alabama beats them pretty bad.
I'm going to say I agree with you, but the one thing I would say is that typically Florida's defense has been pretty solid, but it just seems like here late in the season, like there's some frustration that's starting to show because the defense is getting frustrated that the offense is not, coming to the table with anything, and at some point the defense just kind of gets exhausted from the whole deal. And so I would agree with you that but I do think that early on in the game, again, Florida's defense is going to rise to the occasion and kind of hold in there because they've got a good defense. And it would just be a matter of could Florida's offense somehow get lucky and have a few things go their way early. And if they could do that, then Florida could make it interesting at least for a half. But short of that kind of guy, we got lucky with a punt return or a big pass play or something like that, I agree with you. I think Alabama's methodical and they just go about their business and they end up crushed them like 45-17.
Okay, I'm gonna go with something close to that. I'm gonna go ahead and say 42-14. Let's say.
Okay.
Okay, and then what's the last one? Then North Carolina, Clemson.
Yeah.
Obviously. I also think Clemson wins this game. I think they're the number one team in the country for a reason. But I do think North Carolina is legit, and I think it could be a close game. So I'm going to go ahead and say, and the fact that Clemson showed in that South Carolina game that they're certainly not invincible. They have had some close victories throughout the year, like the Notre Dame game. So I'm going to go ahead and say Clemson wins it, let's say 31-24.
You know what? I would say I agree with you about all of that stuff. I'm not sure North Carolina is going to score 24. But I'll say Clemson. I'll say Clemson is going to be. Let's do 35 for Clemson, and let's do. I keep landing on 17 for some reason, but I'm going to say 35-17. Clemson beats North Carolina.
Yeah, you do have a lot of 17s this week.
I do, yeah.
And when I looked it up on ESPN, I actually saw there are some other games going on. Temple and Houston, number 22 and number 19. That might be a good game. And Texas Baylor, inter-Texas battle. So
yeah, that will be interesting. Well, and I mean, it's that Texas is one of those 5-win teams right now, if I remember correctly, or maybe they're a 4-win team that's trying to get to 5 wins. I don't remember exactly their record, but this would be a big game for Texas to win if they could find a way to do so.
Mm-hmm. That would be interesting. A big upset.
Yes.
After Baylor just lost to TCU.
I know. So the question would be, do they spiral or do they rise to the occasion when the game effectively doesn't matter except for bowl position for them?
Right. Yeah, but they could. I mean, they're still in the top 15. They can still go to a good bowl.
Oh, absolutely. That's what I mean. Bowl position. Yeah, they're not getting into the playoff under any circumstance at this point. But and so the question is, are they focused?
Yeah, you're correct. Texas is currently 4-7, so they're playing to get to 5.
Yeah, and so they could potentially go to a bowl game if they get to 5-7. Mm-hmm. I don't know what their APR is, but
yeah, it's possible. Alrighty then. Well, that wraps this up, I think, for this episode. I'm going to be looking forward to these conference.
Well, but no, I have a question for you.
Oh, okay.
So I thought that last year, when, at the end of the day, the committee did a great job of going through this and kind of sorting through the mesh and getting the right 4 teams. And let's, we've got one more week before they have to make their final decision, and we'll certainly talk about it then. But in general, as you see the process play out over the course of this season, how do you feel like they did?
Well, I'm happy with them on everything except for, well, one, I thought the rise of Oklahoma so fast last week was kind of weird, but I think they're fine now that they beat Oklahoma State. But Iowa, having looked at their record and seeing them play against Nebraska and all that, I do feel like they are definitely the most overrated team in college football right now. I don't think they're the 4th best team in the nation. I understand why the committee is doing that, because they are, a unbeaten team within one of the Power 5 conferences, and they have beaten Northwestern and Wisconsin. Northwestern, who's I think currently ranked like 14th, so they're still a very legitimate football team. So they do have some quality wins on their plate, but right. I find it hard to believe. I'd be very shocked if they were to beat Michigan State next week and they were in the game. Although I mean, if I were to beat Michigan State, I think Michigan State is a very good football team. If I were to find a way to do that, then I'd have to acknowledge them for finding it in them to do that. But that is the one thing that would be very strange if Iowa were to be in that top 4 at the end of this.
Right. Well, and I agree, and I think that. But I believe that they're going about the task they've been given very well. I would again give them a very substantial, A type of grade on how they've gone about this process. And I agree with you that maybe there's some debate about them possibly using a little bit more of the eye test in their decision making this year than they did the previous year. And maybe doing, they've indicated that they do not want to ever, what do I want to say? They do not want to be caught or be accused of looking ahead, right? Of projecting the future. But to some extent, I think they have to do that, right? There's a certain amount of that you have to do, and thankfully they can look ahead to games that still need to be played as the season progresses that are going to take care of those things. They'll take care of themselves, right?
Right. I actually did just we forgot one thing.
Oh.
I'm just remembering now. Last week we updated our top six as we do,
Hmm.
and both of us, I believe we had, yeah, we did have a very similar looks because you ranking based off of what last week's was. You said Clemson, Alabama, Iowa, Notre Dame, Michigan State, and Oklahoma. Um,
Right.
and then I said Clemson, Alabama, Michigan State, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Baylor, thinking in terms of like the end of the year, like after the conference championship games. But now both of us have to make some changes though, because for me, Notre Dame and Baylor lost, and for you,
Right.
Notre Dame lost, obviously. Um,
Right.
so in terms of who I think is going to be, the top six teams in the country as of the end of this weekend, I think it's going to be a little well, boring for the most part, I guess. Yeah, at Michigan State beating Iowa is technically an upset, even though I think they're the favored team in my mind. But I'm gonna say Clemson remains number one, Alabama's number two, um, Oklahoma's number three, MSU's number four. I'm gonna say I believe Stanford beats USC, so they're number five, and then Ohio State then is number six. That's what I think it's gonna
Hmm.
be.
Interesting. Okay, I'm going to have a little bit of a different take. I believe that Michigan State's going to beat Iowa because Michigan State beats number 4 Iowa. Their collective resume is better, and so they will move ahead of 11-1 Oklahoma,
Mm,
and Oklahoma will fall to fourth. Michigan State will be third, and Alabama and Clemson will remain 1 and 2. Again, because both Alabama and Clemson are going to be playing conference championship games and presumably win those games, so they'll both have victories against fairly good teams. But I could see Michigan State even moving into the number 2 spot ahead of Alabama as well. Because when you look at it again, body of work, Michigan State is going to gain a victory against the number 4 team, undefeated Iowa Hawkeyes, right? As opposed to beating, a number 18 Florida,
right.
right? So to me, that win should propel Michigan State a little bit. And the question is how much. And again, does the committee end up devaluing Iowa with kind of an "I told you so" attitude about Iowa? Because they're still probably looking at Iowa as an incomplete in terms of the data. Iowa really hasn't had to be challenged by a preeminent team. This is their first challenge by that type of level of team. And so if Michigan State were to beat them and beat them badly, for example, by 3 touchdowns or something or more, then I think Iowa tumbles. You know what I mean? And so then maybe Michigan State's jump isn't very substantial, and it just jumps into the 4th spot and we're done. But I could easily see Michigan State jumping Oklahoma.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the ranking of the teams, in terms of Michigan State jumping, but I'll agree with you. I think if it's a close victory for Michigan State, they stay at number four. I think if they dominate Iowa, they jump over Oklahoma to the number 3 spot. I
Right.
find it hard to believe in any scenario. I mean, and I guess the only way I could see them jumping to number 2 over Alabama is if like Alabama were to win in a close overtime battle and
Right.
play kind of ugly in the Florida game. Alabama would
Right.
have to do bad, I think. No amount of
Yeah.
MSU being great would
Well,
jump
well,
them.
but ultimately, here's the significant impact of that, though. The significant impact of that is, if I'm a Michigan State fan, I don't want to jump Oklahoma. I
Right.
want to be 4. I don't want to be 3 because I want at number 4 to play Clemson in the semifinal game. I want to play in the Orange Bowl against Clemson. I do not want to play Alabama in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. Okay,
Hmm.
I want the matchup with Clemson because if I'm looking at matchups, I believe Michigan State matches up with a Clemson team better than they might match up against an Alabama team. It's just my gut. Um, and then let Alabama and Oklahoma duke it out over there in the other bowl. Then one of those teams knocks the other one out, and only one of those, physically, dominant teams survives that game. and maybe they beat each other up enough that then when you play in the championship, you're playing a little bit of a battered opponent. And again, I'm just thinking strategy here for Michigan State.
Yeah, you might be right about that. I had to thought about that. I mean, I'd have to examine Clemson a little bit more closely. I haven't watched as many of their games in terms of are they better than Alabama or not, or how do they match up against Michigan State specifically. I think that's more of what you're saying, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think Clemson. If I look at Alabama, Oklahoma, and Iowa, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Michigan State, I look at three teams that pride themselves and have a history of being very physical football teams, and just very well coached physical football teams. Clemson is just athlete haven, man. They got athletes everywhere, okay, and they fly and they are just explosive. But I question whether they have that mental and physical toughness that those other three have. And so my thought would be, if I'm Michigan State, I want to be the guy that, man, that was an interesting burp. I want to be the team that gets to play Clemson and see if I can match up. Now, don't get me wrong, that would be a very tough matchup for Michigan State. They don't typically do well with good athletic quarterbacks. That's why we beat them, because Tommy was able to make them pay, right? That quarters defense that they play is susceptible to an athletic quarterback, and trust me, Clemson has that. Alabama doesn't. Alabama has a traditional quarterback. So, frankly, if you look at it from that standpoint, maybe Michigan State does want to play against Alabama. I just think the physical dominance of Alabama's offensive line and their running back would be something that I wouldn't want to face if I'm Michigan State. I think I would rather take my chances with the athletic Clemson team and see if I could contain those athletes with my scheme and go that route.
All right. And what is your number 5 and 6 then?
Oh, then 5 and 6. I'm going to say Iowa's going to tumble, obviously. And so then I agree with you that if Stanford beats USC and as conference champions, Stanford jumps Ohio State and ends up at number 5. And then Ohio State stays at number 6. Notre Dame then would be 7, and there you go from there. Florida State,
right.
TCU, Baylor, everybody kind of just takes position after that. But I think if Iowa loses, they tumble probably 5 or 6 or 7 spots. And I would say that North Carolina, if they lose, will also tumble quite a ways too.
Yep, I would agree with that. Okay, so now we're really going to wrap it up this time. Okay. We always joke that we don't want it to go too long. We always say before the podcast, and yet somehow we end up making them, 40-minute, 50-minute podcasts.
Dang it. Yep.
But, hey.
Well, it's hard.
Yeah, and there's a good stuff to discuss. I mean, we're right on the verge of the championship games. This is an exciting time.
It should be a great weekend. It really should be a great weekend. Some good games. Matchup wise, maybe there's a few, like you said, that, I mean, we certainly projected a lot of fairly lopsided victories, right? I mean, we didn't predict very many close games.
Yeah. No, I mean, I do believe that, this weekend could turn out, we have all this speculation about who could move where. It could be very boring where, MSU wins, so they're in, and then all the other teams who are favored to win, and that's our top 4. Is kind of, although...
And frankly, that's how I expect it to happen.
True. Although, and I keep saying this, but, I mean, in terms of the committee and the rankings, Michigan State beating Iowa is an upset, so, I mean, that would be a big change.
Yeah, but I think Iowa is placed there because they're recognizing and giving credit for the fact that they're undefeated. Mm-hmm. That's the only reason. I think if you asked all 12 members of that committee who they thought was going to win the Michigan State Iowa game, every one of them would tell you Michigan State.
Mm-hmm. All righty then. Well, we will see this weekend. The deciding battle for the Big Ten.
That's right. Absolutely.
All right.
All righty. Good stuff, buddy. Good to hear your voice, and looking forward to talking college football with you again very shortly.
That's right. All right. You guys can find us on footballthrowdown.podomatic.com. You can also find us on iTunes. Leave us ratings and reviews there or comment on the Podomatic page. You can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. We're always waiting to hear from you guys. And thank you out there for listening. Until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.